welcome everybody. We've got the first item, apologies, so I'll move that Bill Moran, his apology be received. We've got a seconder. Heath, okay. All those in favour?
Aye.
Aye. Carried, thank you. There's been no declarations of conflicts of interest, nor any matters lying on the table, or no request for a public forum, so nothing's required there. So the next item is the confirmation of the agenda. So I'm happy to move that the agenda is confirmed. You've got a seconder for that?
I'll second, Lyle.
Lyle, thank you. All those in favour?
Aye.
Aye. Just to clarify, Lyle, were you in the whole meeting last time?
I think so. I can't.
Yeah, it was the meeting before, I think.
Yeah, that's right. That was my memory as well, Lyle. So that's fine. You'll second. All those in favour? Carried. Thank you. We've got confirmation of the public minutes of the meeting of the 11th of June. So we need those to be confirmed as a true and correct record. We've got a mover for that.
Peter moves, Stu.
Thank you. And a seconder?
I'll second that, Stuart, Lisa.
Right. All those in favour?
Aye.
Aye. Carried. Thank you. Right. Moving now to risk and compliance update. So Gareth is going to come forward. Morning, Gareth.
Morning, members of the committee. Through you, Chair, just want to give a brief update and overview of a couple of points that are outlined in the report, if I may, please. So in summary, this is follows the structure of the standard report to the Audit, Finance and Risk Committee. The report is for noting. It requests, or I should say, it provides an overview of work that is happening in the risk and compliance team. There's a couple of specific items on the agenda today that I won't go through in detail. Happy to answer questions, but I do wish just to call them out. First thing is to say that the report is obviously a point in time report. It was prepared a few weeks ago, so we are actively as a team working across the business through risk workshops. The report states that we have 63 treatment plans in place, and we did at the time of writing. We now have over 100. So these things move fairly quickly during workshop period. Some good progress is being made there. We also have added a new attachment. The committee requested oversight of the status of our tier 1 risks. So this is the first time you've seen that. Happy to take any feedback as to whether it meets your needs or needs any changes. More than happy to take that away. There's been a minor change in just the description of a risk. That's risk 10021, ineffective operations, maintenance or renewal of property or infrastructure assets leading to failures. The risk status is maintained at very high. The change in that is to clarify and make it much more clear and easier to understand exactly what that risk relates to. No other changes to the risk have been made.
Okay, thank you, Gareth.
Just a couple of other things, sorry if I may. The report covers up a couple of updates that were requested by the committee, one on Shotover wastewater treatment plant, one on our response to wildfire risks. We've reported that previously to this committee. And just to let the committee know that we do have a senior insurance advisor starting with us in a couple of weeks, 23rd of September. So that person will pick up the risk strategy, insurance strategy, which I know this committee has been very keen to have an oversight of. Obviously, we've provided updates previously. This will be additional capacity in that space for us to make sure we're clear around what our response needs to be to a fairly difficult market at the moment in the insurance space.
Okay, open it up for questions.
Mr. Chair, just on that, is that a new position? Or we ever had what do you call it, a senior insurance advisor before?
So we've taken the opportunity, as I reported, I think to the committee last time, we have a vacancy that's sat in my team now for a little while. Unfortunately, we haven't been able to recruit a risk and compliance advisor. Part of the risk and compliance advisor role is to look at insurance. We've taken the view that we will take an opportunity to use that headcount. So it's not a new headcount. We're bringing someone in for 6 months in that role, but specifically to look at insurance for us for that period.
It's full-time.
Full-time for 6 months.
So it's fixed term role. Fixed term. Yeah, Mr. Chair, this I just trying to get a bit of understanding. We've got all this, you've done all the framework, you've got all the policies, all that in place. So just trying to get just a very simple example of how it actually works. So I'm say a project manager out here. I've got all this thing and I'm actually working on work. What do you expect that project manager? How does it actually work on the ground to feed into this whole structure and manage the risk? Is that a very simple question?
That's a very good question. Whether it's a simple answer, I will try and summarise, obviously happy to answer any follow-up questions through you, Chair. Essentially, I meet periodically with tier 3 managers, so direct reports through to general managers. We sit down, we look at risks that are in the risk register, we go over treatment plans, we talk about any emerging risks, we reevaluate to check that likelihood and consequence levels are appropriate, whether anything that I'm aware of might have changed and influenced that risk. That's a really good conversation. We then talk about treatment plans, and broadly, there's 3 different approaches to how we record treatment plans, and that depends on the nature of the risk. So some team members are documenting detailed separate treatment plans. We have a formal structure for that. So what is the risk? How are we going to seek to mitigate that risk? And who's responsible for implementing controls? That's recorded in treatment plans. We then track that. So we have tasks that we create and we allocate people through the system. We obviously make sure when we're touching base with those teams that those things are being done. So for your example, in the project space, project risks are dealt with outside of our organisational-wide risk register. We have a system called Sentient that manages risks. That's our project management system. And obviously, we talk very frequently with the teams around risks in the project space and how they influence our, in inverted commas, corporate risk register.
So if someone, working away on something, think, Jesus, could be a risk emerging, they're likely you'd be the first, they call you and get on with it.
Yes, as I've said previously,
get the advice from you and work their way through it, or they had the training to just take it forward through their system.
Yes, yeah, and I've said this previously, I think we have a really good risk culture in terms of identifying risks, talking to me. People are being very proactive and bringing things to my attention, involved in lots of ad hoc meetings outside of the quarterly reviews as well. I don't have any significant concerns in that regard.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Yeah, thank you.
So, Stu, I wonder, it might be useful to add, and so you've got the sort of the wider work you're doing on the risk ecosystem, so we're connecting and joining risks much more closely together. So the interconnected risks are being looked at. I forget what you call it. I called it the sort of you had the dog shape.
I did.
So it's not a technical term, but
so the technical term that we're using, and I think it is only us using it, is our risk ecology, and I think it's a really useful way of describing our interactions between risks. So broadly, historically, risk management was around looking at risks on a line-by-line basis. So the standard approach would be identify a risk, identify a treatment plan to treat that risk. And we're looking at things slightly differently as many organisations are. So we're now in our system and actively when we meet with teams, we're talking about which other risks might be influenced by a risk. A good example of that would be a change in the economic outlook for Queenstown. Obviously, that has an influence on a number of risks that we have sat in our risk register. To Mike's point, it's really important for us to understand that interconnectedness between our risks. For a number of reasons. First thing is it allows us to create treatment plans that don't just focus on one risk. So you'll see that the number of treatment plans we have is not directly related to the number of risks we have. Several risks have treatment plans that sit across multiple risks, if that makes sense. That's not a one-to-one relationship. The other thing is in the future, and I touch on this briefly in the report, we are upgrading our system that will allow us to have workflow. So what that means is when one risk is updated, so the likelihood changes and becomes much more likely, any person who owns a risk that is influenced or is influencing that risk will be notified so that they can do a re-review and check that their risk is relevant, mitigation plans are in place, and there's changes as necessary taken to the treatment planning activities that we're doing. Hopefully that's a reasonable summary of that interconnectedness, which we are branding risk ecology.
We're trying to pay for the long.
We're trying to trademark that. we're not
Risk ecology.
risk ecology. Yeah. Essentially just to articulate the fact that our risk environment is live, it changes on a day-to-day basis. I'm having conversations all of the time. Risk likelihood goes up, goes down, consequence goes up or down. Number of treatment plans we have changes. So to my first point, obviously every time I'm reporting to you, it's a point in time at the time I'm writing the report. By the time I get to the meeting, in some way that would have changed.
Thank you.
Thank you, Gareth.
I see Nikki's hand up, Stu,
And Lisa's as
and
well.
Lisa's as well.
Yep.
Who goes, Sean? Okay, oh, through the chair. Maybe, sort of, I've got a few questions, but maybe off the back there, it might be useful to follow up with the compliance obligation register, because I did note there was 1,086 obligations, and I'm not sure how that works in practice when someone has 1,086 obligations. How does that get prioritised, you know, so that the important ones for a particular department are highlighted in front of them? And is there a process yet for that, or are we still working on it?
Happy to answer that through you, Chair.
Thank you, Gareth.
So the way that compliance obligations are managed is very similar to the way that organisations generally manage risk. As I've noticed previously, we are going on a journey of updating and improving our risk management systems. We've got a number of stages that we intend to implement in that space. Once we've done that, we then intend to build upon that in the compliance obligations space. In terms of prioritisation, our prioritisation is based on risk. So each of our obligations that sit in our obligations register have a risk of non-compliance. Whether that's reputational, the risk of prosecution in the worst case. Obviously, all of those things are influenced by legislation, so we manage those on a risk basis. We don't currently have a system that manages compliance obligations registers. We're managing that in an Excel spreadsheet at the moment. So when I meet with tier 3 managers, I'm having a conversation with them around obligations, and obviously we focus on those that are highest risk based on the obligations register. And then we update that obligations register every 6 months. So when Williams do that for us, they're due to do that in October. So we'll have a updated version of that when we come back to the AFR in December.
Thinking of the Local Government Act risks around consultation and decision making and compliance with those processes, would they rate highly? Are they a high risk, or are they a low risk? Because as an elected member, I would like to see those elevated. If we're prioritising based on risk, are those going to fall below a threshold where they're not prioritised and emphasised?
Through you, Chair, unfortunately, I can only partly answer that question without bringing the obligations register up. As you know, it's got a high number of obligations. I don't actually know off the top of my head, in fact, where we sit with the Local Government Act obligations. They're obviously very critical to us. What I can say is that we have a number of controls that you're aware of at that place, in that space. They are well understood in terms of what we do in the governance space. What I can say is they don't sit on their obligations register in the very high category. They're
Right.
managed, from my perspective, in a way that's well understood by the organisation and council.
Okay, it would be, just from my perspective, just with community trust and maintaining that, it would be useful to have a look at that and just to see whether the committee is happy with where that sits in the prioritisation of risk around non-compliance. Just personally, I don't know whether there's a bigger piece to come to us where we can look at that. But as an elected member, I'd like to think that those were priorities.
Well, I think that, those form part of every report that we actually present to council. There's an assessment about those compliances, particularly in terms of the impacted parties. So there's a lot of those compliances. While we talk about a big schedule, I mean, a lot of those compliances are managed on a day-to-day basis by staff right through the organisation.
Yeah, that's all I'm looking for, is to make sure that those are front and centre, because we are local government, but it'll be interesting to have a look at things develop down the track. Through the chair, I have a couple more questions. Some of them I can leave, I guess. Just on the new description of ineffective operations and maintenance, further in the report, it does acknowledge the risk to growth, potentially, of the district. Just wondering why that didn't make it in and whether it needs to. Thinking about the Martinborough example, where I think they've got a wastewater treatment plant that is not working, and I think it's Martinborough, they've put a halt to new, I don't know whether it's building consents or resource consents, but it's sort of a no-growth zone until they've got that sorted. Just wondering whether that needs to be in the description, given it's in the report.
Happy to answer that through you, Chair.
Yep.
I suppose from a broad perspective, without going into the specifics, it goes back to the comment that I raised around risk interconnectedness. So we do have several risks in our risk register, and one at the tier 1 level that relates to implication of QLDC being able to achieve its strategy for growth. The best response to that would be to link those risks.
Right.
Rather than try and encapsulate all different types of risks into one risk. I don't think that's particularly helpful. Understanding that they're linked as they are, I think, is much more useful for us.
So they are currently linked?
Yes, I think they are. I'll check that. I'll make sure they are. Yeah,
that would be great. Thank you. Two other quick ones hopefully quick through the chair. One is around risk 117. Which looks at our response to the civil defence emergency. And I think it's in the category of unlikely. I'm just wondering why it sits in the category of unlikely, and given the headroom that we've got, and I'm not sure of our insurance strategy and cover, but I feel like now that we don't have much headroom left, the chance of not responding well might be more likely than it was.
Again, I'm happy to touch on that and respond through you, Chair.
Yeah, thank you, Gareth.
The risk management policy obviously has a likelihood and consequence table in it. The likelihood ratings relate to two things. There's two definitions of likelihood. One is a return frequency, and one is a likelihood within the next 12 months. That's a fairly standard approach that local government use in terms of evaluating the likelihood of risks. So the way that myself and Bill Nicol obviously work through that risk is understanding the different return periods and likelihood of certain events with certain consequences, and then evaluate the risk and our controls that we have in place. Obviously, Bill Nicol has provided a number of updates to this committee, and we'll give an update obviously to you in terms of where we're at with some of those things. We have good controls in that space, and the likely return of an event that is catastrophic obviously needs to be factored into that risk rating.
As well as that, though, because to me it's the risk of not responding well, which must take into account the likelihood of the natural hazard, as well as the likelihood that we're prepared, if that makes sense. So it's the two things together. Not responding well, it's not the likelihood of the hazard, it's the likelihood of not responding, which must take into account the funding that we have to, you know, react in the event of is that how it was put into the table, or have we not factored in? I'm just very conscious that we don't have a lot of headroom at the moment, and it should be factored into everything, our insurance strategy and our risks and how we deal with them.
Yeah, we've got insurance in place for some of those risks, so all of that needs to be factored in. It's not just it.
It's not, I guess my point is, it's not just the probability of a natural hazard, it's the likelihood of us not having the resources to respond. They form.
I think you also have, probably, sorry, just to,
Yeah.
you know, it is not, I mean, if there is a significant natural hazard, it is not as though the rest of the organisation just keeps working. In any major event, if there were capital implications, we would review our capital works program and we would reprioritise funding. So there's a whole lot of things. I don't think I've not seen any situation where a council has not actually chosen to respond because it thinks it doesn't have the money to do so. So I don't see that as a high risk. I see that as a management structure as you're dealing with an event like that.
So our insurance strategy will be part of mitigating that, obviously, and that will be something that will be dealt with by the new manager.
Yeah, so we, as Stuart Burns touched on, we have insurance. We have a collective policy with a number of councils to respond to what is defined as a catastrophic event. So yes, we're across that. It's part of our November renewal. Certainly the new person coming in will have a look at that and test that it's fit for purpose. But we have had that reviewed previously, and our approach to that is considered to be good, if not best practice.
Thank you. And look,
Nikki, if you've got any others, might pay to take those up outside the meeting. We're going to run out of time today.
I just have one left around ineffective governance. I just wanted to ask if there's a treatment plan and controls around that, just noting that, you know, the spatial plan Generation 2's had no governance over it for over a year, and how we are managing that risk. So is there a treatment plan? Are there controls? And is that what you mean? Is that governance at this level?
Happy to answer that question through you, Chair.
Thank you, Darren.
Very
Thanks,
quickly, yes, we have treatment plans in place for that. Governance sits at this level, it also sits at other levels in terms of project governance and things like that. We have treatment plans in place for both of those levels and other levels as well. So I'm comfortable we have treatment plans. It's not to say they're static and don't move forward. As I said earlier, these things do, but we do have treatment plans.
It would be useful to have a look at them as the governance team. Thank you.
Yep. Thank you.
Thank
So
you.
Lisa, you had a question?
Thank you. Through the chair, yes, please. First one, just a quick one on one of the individual risks around wildfire, page 22. Point 19, steps and actions others can take. Just interested in whether the organisation has any ability to look at our leases around costs borne by leasee responsibilities and a wider stakeholder group there. I mean, we're talking about future having to remove a lot more material and things from some of our wildfire sites and burden coming back on the ratepayer. Is that something we should be looking at, changing where the risk sits around covering cost of things with our leases?
Through you, Chair, I'm happy to touch on that, and I might seek some guidance from the manager that looks after that area, Ken. We should always consider all, I suppose, opportunities in terms of transferring risk where we can, would be my broad response to that. Obviously, we work with our leaseholders in terms of wildfire management to understand their perspectives, but also make sure that QLDC has the right response in place. Broadly, I think it's a good question in terms of how we collectively take accountability and responsibility for that. And I know we're working with each of our leaseholders in that regard. I probably don't have anything else to add to that at this stage, but happy if Kenneth wants to add anything in the room.
Something I'm happy to follow up on afterwards, Ken, but conscious of of time of maybe trying to get my other questions in as well.
Okay.
A reflection on, and it ties back into this, I suppose I want some understanding around our approach to three types of risk. The first being our preventable self-inflicted risk that arises internally out of the organisation, and that can often be rules-based. And I'm concerned that we're at risk of getting into ever increasing amounts of detail and debate and active oversight around our rule-based risks that arise from the inside. And that might be an example that I've just given there of this governance body trying to delve down into whether we can make a lessee chop down a tree instead of us. So what I'm curious about there is that how do we eliminate or avoid more preventable self-inflicted risks? Where do we set limits on ourselves as far as how much detail we debate and require? And then the second type of risk, the strategic calculated risk. I really want to understand, are we starting to think of our strategies through a risk-based approach? Like, what's our superior strategic return on some of our risks? Because if we don't take risks, we're not going to get reward for risk. And I'm curious about what our organisational appetite is for risk in that strategic space, and how much we're really being strategic around our thinking of strategy and risk. And again, you don't have to come back to me on this now, Gareth, because it was like the big picture thinking. But the other bits, I suppose, the third type is that external exposure to risk, where it arises from our changes and having to be agile to government policy and these moves that we're making, and also picking up on what Councillor Gladding said around how much risk and headroom do we actually allow for in things that are outside of our control, like natural events occurring out of the blue to us. So my questions through the chair on that are can we start to get some clear guidance around how we avoid our internal arising risk, clear on how our strategy links to our appetite for risk, and giving us guidance around what bits to not waste our energy on, because at the moment we don't even have a clear picture as to the external controls.
Probably going through you, Mr. Chair, probably going to have to come back to you on
all of that.
responses to those.
Yeah.
I might need to clarify.
That was my overall questions to your whole report, but thanks, Gareth, because I can see the detail forming up. I can see the buy-in from the organisation. My concern is that, as Councillor Gladding said, with over 1,000 obligations on some of those, that we're at risk of making you and making the organisation start to cut out things like toasted marshmallows at Matariki or climbing on the Arrowdown Rock, being significant over how we negotiate a regional or a city. And I just think we're out of balance.
Through you, Chair, I'm happy to give an initial brief response to that, which will hopefully provide some assurance to the members of the committee.
Thank you, Gareth.
So the first thing to say is when we look at risks, we categorise them as internal or external. So we do have a way of determining whether they're things that influence us that come from the external environment, and how we therefore respond to those, and risks that are created by internal operations, for want of a better phrase. So we do look at that. The point around strategic risks. So in summary, we have a number of strategic risks. 17 of those are on our Tier 1 risk register. We have other strategic risks that sit behind that in our Tier 2 risk register. They have treatment plans. Certainly the highest risk strategic risks are prioritised. That's how we prioritise all of our risks. I suppose your other question, Councillor Guy, in terms of how do we make sure we're not looking at the low-level risks and losing sight of those bigger risks. All of my risk workshops are prioritised by risk level. So we've started doing treatment planning activities based on that. That's why we've not yet got a treatment plan across all of our risks documented. As I say in my report, we have a large number of treatment plans that exist, are in place, and are effective that aren't yet in the system. And that's because obviously that work is still to be done by me and my team. So broadly, all of what you covered off is covered off in the way we manage our risks, internal, external, understood, prioritised by risk level, and strategic risks form a core component of that work that we do with the business.
That's good.
Thank you, Gareth, and good questions. Yeah. So any further questions?
I did have one, Stuart, just around the QAC, it's point 29. And I'm just not sure that was exactly what we agreed. I know there was some kerfuffle when we looked at QAC and what we wanted back from them in terms of reporting and managing those gateways. This at point 29, page 26, it looks like we're going to be given an overview of the gateways and so on, but not have them come back to us ahead of the gateways to give us, I guess, an overview of the financial position and for us to take a look at the risk. And I actually can't find the original or the minutes of that meeting to see what the resolution was, but Megan might have, looks like Megan's got her hand up.
Yeah, I can respond to that.
Thank you.
Quite good. That was actually, that's probably outside of the agreed framework, which is intended to be exception reporting. But what the QAC did undertake to us, it wasn't a workshop setting, but we have, it is actually in their statement of intent, is that they will come back to the council and consult the council at each investment gateway.
Okay, so that will go to the council instead of to the AFRC, that gateway reporting
process.
Okay. Thank you for clarifying.
Thank you for that. Okay, we've got a mover for noting the contents of the report. Nikki, your move.
Happy to move.
And Lisa, your second.
Thank you.
All those in favour? Carry.
Aye.
Thank you. Moving next to sensitive expenditure. So we've got Grant Duffy coming forward.
Morning. I take it that the sensitive expenditure report's been read, and does anyone have any questions?
I just wanted to, through the chair, mention that the agenda came in late, I think, to the externals. So if there's anything worth highlighting, it might be worth highlighting. I'm not sure if everyone's had a chance to read it in full.
Oh, okay.
Just because it was sent through on Tuesday.
It was just to me.
Oh, was it?
Stuart, I got the agenda later. I mentioned to Nikki before it, but
Oh, it was just.
possibly woefully underprepared, but I've done my best to get through it.
Yes,
but
it
no,
was. It was late coming out. Yeah.
But on this agenda item, I don't have questions.
Right.
We've got nothing particularly to highlight, there's nothing to call out.
That's fine.
Such.
Okay. So we'll take the report as read, and it's just if there's any questions.
I do have a couple, Stu.
Okay.
So through the chair. So just looking again at first question, debtors analysis. How often do those come through? I'm just not sure. We sort of get them, I thought we got them each meeting, but we haven't had one.
For you, Mr. Chair, the financial report that we normally provide to the committee on a regular basis hasn't been provided for this meeting, mainly because the staff are busy finalising the LTP and working through the annual report. It was discussed with the chair and agreed, so
Right.
we will see that come through in the next meeting.
Okay, it was just
And Stu, just the other point was this meeting was brought forward from October to now.
Correct.
And so it's just been impossible for the staff to deal with what they've got on, as well as preparing the report early.
So next time we'll get an update on that mortgage call and the debtors and how that's been worked through. Thank you.
Yeah.
The other one was just around the purchase orders less than 10K, which is always a an interesting one. It looks like we've assumed there's sort of a threshold of 100K. So if those individual 10K purchase orders add up to 100K, then we look at them as a risk. I'm just wondering how many suppliers might have accumulated, 5 or 6 less than 10K. So, and does that make sense?
It does make sense. We do review all purchase orders under 10K to see where they get to in total.
Yeah.
But we've reported there on where the cumulative total for purchase orders under 10K for the entire year, not just the quarter, exceeds 100,000.
Yeah.
And the findings are that there are 11 suppliers with individual purchase orders of less than 10,000 for the entire year that accumulate up to 100,000. Then we really did look at those ones in detail.
And how many underneath? Because that's also potentially an issue, right? Like I don't think the committee set the threshold at 100K. So I'm just wondering, do you look at the ones below that? Because if
We do. We look at all of them, but what we've done is we've reported in here in paragraph 17 where the cumulative total of those exceeded 100K.
I guess I'm just concerned because there's 11 that exceeded 100K.
That's correct.
How many exceeded 50? How many exceeded 60? How many? Is it giving us a good enough picture? Because presumably there might be more that exceeded a lower figure.
Right. We do have that picture, but it hasn't been reported.
I think it would be useful. I don't know how much detail we need to go into, Stu, but I do think there's a risk if we don't get the picture. Maybe there's a way to not look in depth, but present us with the numbers that accumulate at different thresholds so that we can.
Yes.
Yeah, understand.
I think that would be helpful to get the full.
But it is comforting to hear that each of them are looked at individually, as well as the cumulative total.
We've just reported the findings of where the cumulative total exceeded $100,000.
So, Stu, I think Catherine was wanting to say something.
Yeah, can you just confirm what thresholds you'd like us to come back with? Is it 10,000, 50,000, 100,000? What is the actual thresholds that you'd like?
Well, I'd like to see the numbers, just not an in-depth analysis maybe, because we can, if there's a lot of them, then we can start to go, well, we need to dig into this a bit more and maybe fix it up. But, if we had cumulative at 30K, 40K, 50K, so with the numbers, that would be helpful. Because if we've got
$10,000 bands, is that kind of what you're?
I would think so, but I'm keen to hear from what the rest of the committee thinks, just numbers, not.
Through Mr. Chair, I understand what you're saying, Mickey, but where to draw a line, we've got a new procurement manager now, we've got a whole lot of process in place. Surely we want to know the red flags, we'll be wanting to report these, without doing that and making sure we're not abusing the policy. Are we second guessing that to go, we don't actually believe what you're doing and we want to have assessment here?
No, I'm just saying the information that they already have, because they say they already have it. Just put it in a little table.
So what do you want down to 30,000?
Get the bigger picture. 30, 40, I mean, you guys can feed into that, but I think 100's too high, given that it's a 10K purchase order that we're looking at. If you're accumulating, if you've got 5.
Come back with the information.
Just a table.
Grant, you can pull that together.
We can, we've already got the information available. We've just reported it the material end of the issue.
I think that's the key. At what point does it become actually material, which I think is Lyle's question. I mean, we can report lots of things, but we can spend a lot of time reporting on the minimus items. And we do have a lot of, in that case, we do have a lot of, repeat items that happen. We're talking about over 1,200 requisitions.
Yes.
But if we have 100 that have gone over, then it'd be good to know, and that may exist under the 100K threshold. So just a number that we can take from there.
Just a comment.
What's the feeling? 50K?
If I just make a comment, Mr. Chair. I think what you've included here is really, really good information and good detail. We'll take the point, Councillor Gladding, but if the information is there and give it to us on the table, yes, we'll look at it, but I think this is more than enough detail at this level. And what it tells me is that there is a process that you're looking at these
internally and like within the management team, like there is some controls in place and there's been some thought given to it to look at, you know, cumulative purchase orders, which has been, so I'm pretty comfortable with the level. As you say, if it's easy to check the table on there, then I think it doesn't hurt, I guess, but like, I think this is pretty appropriate.
If I could comment as well, please, Chair, through the chair.
Yes, yes, Lisa.
Thank you. I agree with Heath I think it comes back to my earlier point around our risk of risks arising within the organisation around our ever increasing amount of detail and active oversight. You've given us the good information in the field. If we were going to perhaps put another benchmark in, I'd suggest around some of the Auditor General levels, for example, 30,000 being a consideration for elected members to keep a track of over our associated interests and their activities with council, or a 50,000 is a halfway point. But I think randomly throwing out 30, 40, 50, 60, we're just going to end up with replicating information that we've already been provided without a lot of good purpose. So, yeah.
In these types of reports, we try and report on the material issues. There's a lot underneath it which we know, which we don't report for the very reason you've outlined. The point's also been made that there's now a full-time procurement managers in place, so that's an important control as well.
Yeah. And I think what we're seeing is that we've got, as this committee, a responsibility for oversight of the system rather than into the individual risks, which you've already given us a good level of detail on. So I'm assured that there's a system in place to keep some oversight of that.
But we're going to pick a different figure.
Through the chair, would that information would then go to internal control? So there has to be some audit function, I guess, of this. So our internal audit, they would have oversight of the lower thresholds. Say, you know, how many are combining to 30K? Well, someone has to have that information and to be doing sort of an audit function on it. Someone. So where that sits, we need to know. If it's not with us, then we need to know it's with someone else and that it will come through.
Very good. Any other questions?
So that does sit with the internal.
So if they have that level of detail, that's great. But if it's not easy to chuck a table in, that would be great too.
Okay.
We
Okay.
just update the table outside of this meeting to councillors.
Okay. Thank you for those questions. Oh, sorry. I'm happy to move the noting of the report, the sensitive expenditure. We've got a seconder.
Yep.
Yeah, thank you, Nikki. All those in favour? I carry. Right. Next is the health and safety and wellbeing report. We've got Alan and Katie and John and Nicola. Big team there. So look, just while you're coming to the table, Bill Moran, I had a discussion with him yesterday just on a number of things. He raised, and as I was going to raise, around the contractor issue. And he was wondering whether there could be some form of penalty in contracts, which I'm sure would be difficult, but I'm just relaying his comments. So that's just to open the discussion.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I'd just like to highlight there have been great participation in the health and safety wellbeing initiatives this past quarter, as well as some excellent professional development opportunities, as you can see from the report. Besides that, we'll take the report as read and are happy to respond to any questions you may have.
You got that one?
You can pick up the one that the chair raised, which I think refers to page 56 around are there opportunities for us to look at how we, well, I think you use the word penalties, Chair, but how we engage with our contractors around managing.
Probably the wrong word. To incentivise them to be more vigilant around their health and safety requirements. And look, it's not just your organisation. I see it everywhere. It's contractors are the issue.
Yeah, and thank you for that question, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. So absolutely, we really foster a strong reporting culture with our contractors and hold them accountable to ensure they're reporting any incidents that need to be followed up. And we see with the reporting trends, it's good that we see that strong reporting culture from contractors as well. Contractor management is a strong focus for us from a health and safety perspective. So we're actively working on the health and safety management contractor system that you can see from the report that's been rolled out over the last 12 months, which is excellent. And we're actually in the progress of working on some online e-modules for the contractor management system as well. So, which is progressing very well.
Good. Any further questions?
Yes, please, Stuart.
Yeah,
Am
Lisa.
I through the chair? Thank you. Thanks, Katie. I'm just looking at the key risks, C through F, public interaction, fitness for work, particularly mental health, isolated workers, operating alone and loneliness, etc., volunteer activities. And I'm thinking of it from the point of view of those engaged by or on behalf of QLDC, as well as those close whānau within our team. And in particular, our community associations and our RTOs. And what I'm concerned about is I'm seeing real risk of loss of organisational and institutional knowledge through our community by public backlash and loss of trust being taken out on our volunteers in these organisations. I'm wondering if some of the fantastic support that I hear of internally as far as training and development around dealing with public or just supporting your own mental well-being or working in isolated situations, we're making these people be the front face of many of our decisions, the chairs of the village associations, the managers of DQ, Lake Wanaka Tourism, Arrowtown Business and Promotion Board. And the risk to their mental health and well-being is very real. We're seeing resignations from our community associations and we're seeing reluctance to belong to these groups and a reluctance in people to stand for elected office. And I'm wondering how we might initiate some dialogue in our communities around the wider footprint of our well-being, and that's really just a table as a reflection on the health and safety. But I know we're actually finding it now challenging to have our community group representatives partner with us in messaging because of the risk they face to their public interface. Where I had an instance yesterday of needing the community groups to work with us on an outcome and having incumbents in those roles tell me it's too dangerous for them to front the community on council business, and that's really concerning. So yeah, to the group and to the team, any ideas? That's from me.
Yeah, thank you, Lisa. Good questions and good observations.
Just a quick comment if I could, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I mean, we're seeing it as well. I mean, people, and I'm not talking about the staff and things like that, staff obviously are, but like people in general are just under pressure at the moment, right? And it manifests itself in some pretty ugly ways, unfortunately. Through our business, we've been investing quite heavily in the wellbeing space for our staff, and it's been a really, really good investment, but it turns so quickly. Like, you'll have the goodwill of somebody today and then something will happen and might be work-related and stuff, and they turn pretty quickly and it happens faster than you notice. Got a big workforce here in the council and the extended workforce that Lisa's touched on. So it's a concerning space to sort of stay in front of and to keep people happy and feeling well, I suppose, themselves. But I don't have any answers, unfortunately, but I do want to make a comment that we do see it in the general community that people are just under major pressure, and if they've got an outlet, council's easy to target, I suppose, in that space, or volunteers that are willing to put their head up above the parapet. So
Through the chair, I'm happy to comment on that and thank you to those comments there as well. From an internal perspective, we're rolling out resiliency programs for the staff, which is excellent. So we've seen some really good participation. And also communication, customer service training for those challenging conversations, if it's a customer concern, and how to approach those and negotiate those concerns as well. So we're doing a lot of work internally to lift that capability so we can respond to those situations. And we also have our diversity, equity, and inclusion statement and strategy and policy that we've just launched as well internally.
Thank you for that. Any further questions?
Chair, just confirm, that's only for QLDC staff they talk about. We've got a lot of other groups there, they're not QLDC, you know, like what they're doing, not QLDC. They've got to do their own action to make this done.
Probably worth noting that, you know, LWT and BQ, APBA, they're not required, they're not there on council's behalf, they are organisations in their own right. We obviously work with them and we're the funding channel for how they get their money, but they're not an organisation to count.
Community associations, I suppose, are a wee bit different, they're close to the council.
Absolutely, and look, if there are issues that are raised through the community associations, we'd be happy to get their feedback and see if we can sort of.
And I think credit to Abby and how she's
you put in
that
place.
role, because it's a great resource to have as that first touch point. I think to be aware of the tension that are within some of these associations and
that's
the
good feedback.
interpersonal skills that they're required to now have to navigate that is pretty complex, along with the new incorporated society rules as well, that are just requiring all of our organisations to step up another level.
Okay. We've got a mover for the noting of the paper.
Happy to move or second.
Yep. And a second. Okay. All those in favour?
Aye.
Carried. Carried. Thank you. Thank you, team. Good report. Okay. Moving to climate and biodiversity plan update. So we've got Bill and Kirsty.
Chair and to committee members, it's a pleasure to be here once again for the quarterly updates on the delivery progress of the climate and biodiversity plan. So just in quick high-level summary, the report in front of you provides some more detailed updates in terms of program delivery. We are in the third year of the plan, so we're, I guess, rapidly looking at the end of this financial year to be the closure of this particular this plan that has been developed. And of course, we are therefore very busy at the moment looking at what the next climate biodiversity plan will look like. So there's a development program for that. We're working very closely with the Climate Reference Group with regards to what the next plan looks like. We've also shared this report with them as part of an output from a recent council workshop that was discussed. The report was received favourably, but I'm very happy to open the floor to any questions and I'll take it.
I've just got one comment from Bill. He was just disappointed in the not started on the rainwater collection. So I'm just passing it back.
Very good news today, Stu. Yes. Noted. That's quite a challenging one, but we know there are other councils, particularly Wellington, that have invested in that space. But it is noted that it's an area of opportunity. There'll be a reply today.
But on that, sorry, Mr. Chair, yes, they haven't started that, so you see. Yeah, we've looked at it in the past, and you've got to look at, you know, I'm not an expert on this, but in a place where there's lots of rain, it's all good, but there's not so much rain sometimes. It doesn't work so well. Anyway, I'll back off.
What I will note just on that point, if I may, through the chair, there is quite a significant amount of work happening with the New Zealand Green Building Council and with the Super Home movement. This is with regards to, I guess, public education and information around best practice principles. So that we're positive that there will be some outputs from that, which will lead into that, the rainwater collection space. But that particular action that was more around how council can incentivise and perhaps subsidising, which some other councils have done at the moment. That's
okay. Any further questions?
I have a question.
Yep.
Thank you. Page 72, e-vehicle charging into our strategic planning. I'm keen to understand, so we've got some approaches from providers that looking at co-funded options with ECA to e-vehicle charge black spots in our network. And I've requested some comparative information around what other councils are doing in this space. What I'm hearing is that there's opportunity there for the e-vehicle chargers to make contribution back in economically once they start generating, or what's it, the word, generating, charging vehicles anyway. What do we investigate? Would these sorts of arrangements be licensed to occupy, lease to these types of things? What do we need to put in place to enable quick uptake with partnerships like this and enable them to get in? Or are we treading a fine line between giving preferential consideration to one provider over another, seeking some guidance?
Through the chair, if I may, very good question, Lisa. And look, it's a very interesting space. I think it falls more towards the latter of it in terms of understanding our role. I will highlight that this is an area that kind of crosses into the property team with regards to what's, I guess, public land. Also crosses into the transport team with their parking strategy. We also have an interest in it from the climate biodiversity space, and also the monitoring enforcement team have an interest in this in terms of how people are utilising existing charging sites. So there has been a significant array of interest from the private sector with regards to potential partnership opportunities. There is a lot happening at a national level as well, as you'll appreciate, with some large commitments, around 10,000 chargers to be rolled out. I guess the acceleration of New Zealand's charging infrastructure is a key part of the emissions reduction plan, which has just come out from government and MFE. So we are waiting to see what will happen in that space. We do know that the preference from central government is to support the private sector, to really incentivise them to lean into this space. So I think council is well positioned in terms of our knowledge of where suitable sites will be. And I believe there is some investigation at the moment regarding council parking sites and facilities with regards to looking at some opportunities there. But I'm quite happy to take that one offline. I know there has been a council request on it, which will provide some information on it. Happy to pass to Tony actually, because it may fall much on your space.
Yeah, so thank you. Thanks, Chair. We've been approached by a number of potential EV charging companies. All of them interesting coming to us because they want to use road reserve or reserve space to locate these chargers. They've come with a variety of different commercial offerings and deals, different charging regimes as well. So one of the things we are looking at the moment is looking at the possibility of like an RFP type process. Going, these are the sites that we might have available, and trying to get some balance, because we're in danger of just responding to each individual company without an overall strategy approach. And as I said, they are coming to us because we typically have areas of available space. A lot of them want to come and use car parking spaces to put their EV chargers on, with no return to the council at all. So we're just trying to work through how we might deal with those in a more strategic and joined up approach.
Thanks, Tony, because I suppose you've reinforced what my concerns are, is that we have so many silos of the organisation that it touches upon. How do we move with agility to fill in our network? Ideally before the summer would be what our transport fleet requires to keep people moving, because I think some of those advances we have had have pointed out the very real black spot around charging that we're sitting on and how quickly we can address that. So I suppose it brings me back to my first questions around how do we eliminate rule-based risk arising from the organisation, slowing down our ability to actually take strategic calculated risk and start getting vehicles charging and hopefully reach some economic return for our district as well through good negotiations.
So I think in that space, and Tony alluded to it, Councillor Guy, I mean, effectively, anybody will want to use public space to do that. And I think we have to be mindful that we could have, rows and rows of e-chargers down streets in Queenstown or Wānanga or Arrowtown. And is that ultimately what the community wants or needs? So actually judging the right balance between what is actually a private good and a private service using public land effectively is something that we'll always be very mindful of. And I think increasingly, as Tony and Bill pointed out, you know, this ultimately is a marketable product. If someone will, and we see increasingly bespoke versions of parking petrol stations starting to occur around the country. And so we've got to be really careful that we don't sign ourselves up to an industry that ultimately is a legacy activity if and when the private market actually starts to perform properly. So those are all real considerations for the teams as they look at this.
Good on
Yeah,
both
thank you.
sides.
Thank
So, Mr. Chair, just to follow on, I have a question, but it's also a comment. I do agree there's a balance, and I think and what I've seen around the country and operating an electric vehicle and how they work, I wouldn't expect the council to go in as big as, say, some of the new developments of 3 parks, with putting in a whole car parks with availability. But, you know, like a couple more down in the centre of Wanaka may be good for, we may get economic return on it, and also good for the economy of town, because people park there, they got to go and buy something while they park there. You know, the question is on page, you've got a table here, you've got 400, 778 and 400 all, like, are they all EVs in Queenstown and Wanaka?
Are we on page?
Page 73.
Yes, through the chair, this is a table that's sourced nationally in terms of accounts for the registrations of EV and hybrid vehicles. So it's just I guess provided as an opportunity to indicate the trending.
So that's not discount, that's everyone.
No, that's everyone involved. So that's
I haven't seen the 400 council vehicles.
Not yet.
Okay, sorry, I'm not there.
Just for context, you've got Councillor Guy with regards to the increase we're seeing. So we're tracking, I guess, what the market is doing. We know that there has been quite a drop off since some of the clean car rebates were actually rescinded, but we are still seeing that our district is quite advanced in regards to its uptake of electric vehicles. There is the potential step change if you look at rental vehicle and mass fleet, obviously conversion, and that's the type of thing we're just kind of monitoring the market to see how things go.
And exciting to see the hydrogen rally car with portable hydrogen charging. And
waiting for my test drive, yes,
yeah. Anyway.
Yeah, Nikki.
Thanks, Joe, through the chair. Questions. Firstly, thanks. It was a really, really good report. Awesome. First one, just on the indicator framework. Now, this goes back to sort of what Councillor Guy is saying, you know, do we spend a whole lot of time and effort doing this indicator framework, but at the same time, it's useful to see. Have you got any thoughts on, because it seems like we're using the indicator framework to a great extent. Are we relying more on the carbon assessments and going into the climate and biodiversity plan, the next one? Would we have that indicator framework? Is it taking away from actually doing stuff, or would it take away from actually doing stuff? Anyway, any thoughts? Welcome.
Yep, no, happy to answer through the chair. Very good question. The indicator framework is basically the measurements that we're looking to see are we progressing. So we do have a data set. We are currently exploring making those more publicly available on the website. We had an extensive framework of indicators from the beginning of this plan. And some of them relate to council data, so such as our emissions inventory for this organisation. Others are external to us. They look at the bird count in the district, looking at biodiversity and environmental indicators. We have ones around looking at the cultural and social kind of side of things. So there's quite a rich data set that you'll appreciate that's available to us. Now, we are working with a number of partner organisations who are also looking at collating data to, show the impact of actions, what the organisations are doing. We're trying to establish some levels of agreement around how that data all comes together into a centralised position. So we'll note that the DMP has quite a lot of environmental measurement aspirations. We also, with our partner organisations, the conservation and biodiversity space, are collecting a huge array of data as well. So the value of that is becoming available to us, and we're looking at how we publicly share it. But we have made clear commitments with the development program for the next plan to ensure those indicators are put to the forefront of our action plan. Right? So they don't lag what we do in terms of what we choose in action, and then we'll go measure it. We're looking at what the indicators are and the targets that we can set, and the actions that will flow from that to see how we can move things forward. So I can give some assurances that there's good data, and it's coming in regards to a public place to hold it.
Awesome. thank you. Second question is, tough question maybe. How much of the Climate and Biodiversity Fund budget went towards that optimal visitation project? Do you know that off the top of your head?
I actually, it's part of the carry forwards, Stu, so I'm not sure whether you're across that, because I have, but I know there was an allocation from the CBP
Yeah.
to support the OBL project.
I don't have the information.
Yeah.
But
I can,
it's a council paper coming to the next meeting.
Okay.
yeah. we can follow that.
So I just, because that project was 250,000 by the sounds of it, and there was money from the Climate and Biodiversity Fund that went into that, and I don't know how
I
much.
provided an estimate of around 50,000, and that was part of the budget from last year that was underspent based on, I guess, where we had got to. We do have a clear action in our CBP, that is to support the delivery of the DMP actions.
Yeah.
So it's got
Exactly, yeah, no, and I saw that and I thought it just says implement the actions outlined in the DMP as an action, which is quite broad because there's a lot of actions in the DMP. And I just wondered, there will be some things in the DMP that will be clearly justified through funding through the Climate and Biodiversity Plan. I think there's a risk if we start to use the Climate and Biodiversity Fund more generally to fund a range of actions from that. So maybe going into the, I guess I think it's a risk reputationally that we need to be funding the right things from the right places, and we may lose the budget if we don't fund things from the right places. So just a thought going forward to that next Climate and Biodiversity Plan, maybe if we could make that, implement the actions out on the DMP more specific to the specific actions that that this group would implement, I guess.
Yes, I just happy to respond to that through the chair. Yes, I think that's we understand the intent there, and I will say that when the action was put in place, the DMP hadn't quite landed, because this is 3 years ago.
Yeah.
But we have been undertaking quite a significant review of the DMP actions, and there is, as you've probably seen through the monitoring reports, an assignment of where those roles are for individual actions or responsibilities. QLDC obviously is a partner to the DMP, and so there are some actions that fall into that space. So it's an active discussion in terms of how we support that.
Well, I 100% agree. It's just making sure we're clear that we're going to start using it as a general policy. And the other one, through the chair, last question was just around, sort of relates to two actions, 1.5 and 1.2. It looks, so this was 1.5 is the carbon accounting across the statutory plans and looking at including guidance for assessing relative climate impact of proposed initiatives in the 2024 LTP. It says that one's complete, but as a decision makers, we kind of didn't get that information on the relative impact of the different initiatives that we could have gone with. And there's a related action, I think, which the update is that there's an independent review into our decision making, and that we've got some tools and guidance, resources and project management methodologies that we're looking at. Is there any more information you can give us on that now, or do we wait? Will there be a report coming on that maybe to the next meeting? I'm just interested in what the findings were, but it may be too early.
Through the chair, happy to respond. Yes, there's existing work programs in place, so we haven't updated specifically on some of the work that's happening around embedding the climate and biodiversity into the decision-making of the council. Happy to bring that to the next report because we have some work programs underway. If I can just question the actions that you're referring to, that was it 1.15?
So I just thought 1.1, or was it 1.15? I thought it was 1.5, but that could be maybe. I thought it was 1.5B, and that wasn't the specific. I took that from the actual plan, not from the list on the website. The list on the website, I don't think it included the A and B in detail. I think it was more generalised, but yeah, develop and agree on that carbon accounting across statutory plans. And it said it was complete, but I'm not sure that part of it's necessarily complete because we've sort of had discussions about that, those sort of methodologies being available for the next LTP. Would that be fair to say?
Yeah, happy to respond. I'll just open that up. So on the website, so there's a two-part, I guess, action for that one. So 1.5. So it does relate to embedding climate accounting into our long-term investment planning. It is split into 1.5A, which is the conducting of the carbon baseline for the 2021, 2030, 2031 10-year plan, so the last 10-year plan. So that work was undertaken. That's the complete section.
That's the complete section.
The next follow-on from that, which is still open in progress, is about how we take that understanding around particularly embodied carbon accounting and embed that into our future investment decision
Sorry, I
making.
might have read the website wrong. I think I might not have clicked on the one.
There's a lot of actions, yes. So, and we've got them in an accordion structure where you have to click on them. But the work around embodied carbon is progressing. We've been very close with Mott McDonald in regards to the Mine Carbon Portal. There's been case studies on some of the work we've undertaken as well. Certainly the current LTP that we're going through, given the volatility of what's moving forward, we're looking at how we kind of can undertake some level of carbon assessments. So the LTP is kind of locked in. It's not a decision-making tool to prioritise which to go. It talks about how we choose to undertake our capital delivery. And so that's what the other program that I mentioned will support as well.
Thank you.
Stephanie,
Okay, thank you for that.
Can I jump in with one last question?
Yes, and then we need to move on. Yep, thank you.
Sure, I can, Lyle will get me in a second. I'm just curious as to whether you're aware of the awards won by our colleagues at Tairāwhiti in their Super Collab and Super Idea Award. The first being a common operations picture, which was one source of truth built from their real-time data around their emergency preparedness, bringing together their GIS and emergency management, which sounds pretty amazing. And the second being their Mariah Emergency Preparedness Resilience Project, around their collaboration around best practice for these community response pods. And I know in our CAs, we've got a bit of action happening that feels a little bit like they're all doing their own thing. And I'm just wondering if we might reach out to Gisborne. They said very clearly at conference that they've got IP there that they're willing to share. And it looks like they've had great success and obviously have been dealt a hammering by natural events that maybe we could share some learning on. So thanks for that.
Yeah. Good response. Thank you. Yes, we are aware, and yes, we do have quite a significant development program with the community response groups. I will note that Arrowtown, Lake Hayes, and Kelvin Peninsula are actually working very well together. But leveraging knowledge and learnings from other areas is we're very much focused on that. And there's been a significant maturity upgrade also across the region. We've got GIS dashboards with regards to group development. And there's a significant amount of resourcing going into that, as well as a community resilience strategy that's starting to put things together. So we're also working with NITAC with regards to understanding where they are deploying their emergency pods.
Right. Thanks.
Right, thank you for that. Thank you for your report. So I'm happy to move the noting of the contents. We've got a seconder.
I'll second, Mr. Chairman.
Yep. All those in favour?
Aye.
Aye, carried. Thank you. Thank you,
Thank
team.
you.
Next, we've got the Lakeview update, and we've got Paul Speedy joining us. So, Paul, we'll take your report as read and just open it up for, unless you've got something you would like to add to what you've written, we'll open it up to questions.
I'd just like to say that I'm to Heath, I'm not in front of you again explaining why we haven't got a title, so I think that's a good milestone. And just want to highlight, the only other thing there is in the last reporting period, the developer was indicating that they would be ready to start at the end of this year. They're now looking at it within the next 12 months, but I think in the public workshop, the developer 2 days ago with elected members was still looking at this year, if possible, but the realities of that we're just highlighting that is now within the next 12 months. But no, over to you.
Thank you. Open it up for questions.
Mr. Chair, thank you. The one that jumps out at me, and it was raised the other day too, I may have missed something in the past, but just understanding where we're sitting with the infrastructure now, noting that we've another 2 million gone off for possibly for stormwater and things. So can you just update us on that and where it's heading? Because I thought most of the infrastructure was complete. I understand why you wouldn't do a stormwater till the project's done, but what are the implications of that? We're only talking stormwater on site, we're not talking about him dig up roads and no. Okay. Can you clarify a bit on that?
Yeah, when we went for subdivision consent, there was obviously a requirement to deal with stormwater and a number of, during the design phase, there were a number of different solutions where we could deal with stormwater before it got to the development lots, or what was moved, because that was quite costly, is to, I don't know whether you've been up to Skyline and had a look at the new building they've got up there, but the amount of work that was done sort of north of there or upward of that building there is quite a bit of work done. So the design team, the infrastructure team, decided and spoke to the developer about an option of integrating the ultimate stormwater solution within the building. Now, through the 224C sign off and through with the consenting team, they were like, that's great, but what if the building never gets built or it's sitting there? What happens in the interim? So currently, we've got a stormwater solution that is effectively a swale that goes through the middle of the lots. And there's a covenant that the consenting team have given us, which says like, if nothing ever happens up on the site, at least you must deliver that and have it there. They're aware that the developer will come to them at some point with some plans around what a stormwater will look like ultimately, which we integrated as part of their building. But until they've actually seen that design and until they can look at it and make sure it meets the requirements of the management of that, then they're going to leave that covenant in place until that happens. So, long story short, the fallback for us is we could go and put in a stormwater solution right now, and we have funding for that. But I think, and the most practical option and the most cost-effective option would be to have an integrated solution with the developer.
Yeah, I understand that. So to get the title, we've got the covenant to enable the title to be.
Yeah, correct. So again,
I'm just trying to, I've come across this in other projects too, where they're simply putting infrastructure in and the developer just wants to rip it up, and so it's also.
Yeah, let's say a poor outcome would be we would be forced to spend $1 million and put a stormwater solution in there, and that would sit there. And then the developer would have to come and remove it and then ultimately come up with another solution that met the requirements of that covenant.
Yeah. But back to the dollar, trying to understand why was that not in the budget before this report, like the previous report and the infrastructure budget? So this extra money for stormwater, or not extra, the budget for stormwater now is included in here. So trying to understand why it's in now, it wasn't in previously.
It was always in. So back in July 2021, it's the same budget that was in the time.
But external from there, then getting back to the dollars, then if nothing had happened, we'd have to put minimum for as well at QLDC cost.
Yes.
But if they do a development and put up a proposal for stormwater, what's the cost share of that likely to be?
We haven't come to an agreement on that yet, but we will agree that the parties have determined that we need to get that done prior to settlement, or at least within the next 12 months.
So they'll have to have their design. Yeah, they have to have that anyway.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Through the chair, I've got follow-on sort of questions around that, just to clarify. So you're saying we still have the option to do a stormwater solution ourselves. They may have to dig it up and change it, but that would be at their cost and their risk. We could still put one in. That's great. We've got $1 million-ish in year one of the LTP for this. And could we put in a solution for that amount now without the risk of it going over? Because have you done the costings for our right? And we don't know what theirs is. So presumably there's some sort of decision making that needs to go on weighing up the risks, because once we start integrating with their building, we're working with them and cost share could go up or down, presumably depending on the agreement and how it's written. How are we doing governance over this? Because we don't have a lot of headroom in the LTP. We need to be really careful about minimising risks of overruns. What's the process going to be? Who's going to decide it? Will this committee have some oversight of what the, I don't know, agreement looks like so we can sort of understand the risks? Because there is a decision to be made, I think.
Yeah, so at the moment, there's a draft infrastructure funding agreement between the infrastructure team and the developer.
Oh,
That's been in place for some time.
okay.
And that sets out basically the principles around the cost share. The issue is it's difficult to determine what that ultimate design is. Because we haven't been through the through the consenting process, so we didn't know what restrictions were around that. But also they haven't designed their part of it. So that will be sitting inside there. I mean, my view on that is currently we've got $1 million for a solution, so that would be our bottom line.
So we wouldn't, that would be the bottom line, is there would be no more than that money that's sitting in year one.
I don't think you can make an absolute statement like that, but I mean, obviously that's the basis on which we go into any discussions, any negotiations. But you know, I don't think anybody can stand in this room at the moment and say, actually, it's going to be $1 million and not $1 more or $1 less. I suppose.
We'll work through that, but I guess in terms of this committee and the risk around that, if there's any variation to what's in the budget, then that would be something that we would, I mean, Mike, you probably want to talk to council about that anyway, and work through that.
We would do a fixed contribution, and if their building design and things ended up costs going over, we would not go over that fixed price that we put in that agreement.
Yeah, I mean, you could have a complicated agreement that sort of says there's a cost share arrangement and to be paid over time. But my view around this is there's $1 million now. We can go ahead and do that, and then you can get rid of it and it's on you, or maybe we come to some agreement around just paying it and moving on. But to reiterate, this is something we don't want to drag on for too long. It needs to be settled, obviously. And like I said, I spoke to Dean this morning around this, off the back of the previous discussions, and this is something that we want to sort out certainly within the next 12 months, if not prior to settlement. It must be done.
Prior to settlement. I mean, the key is that we've got as Paul has explained, a backfall position, which says actually if we're not getting progress, we can go and build our own swale, and then every other cost becomes theirs.
Yeah.
And we also need to, I suppose, we'll always be alert to that there may be additional benefits and additional things we want to wind into that, which may not have been anticipated. So, you know, if that's the case, there may be a change in the scope of what's being delivered. But, you know, and I don't know that there is. I don't have any anticipation that there would be.
It's a pretty simple agreement. It was done by, it was approached by the then general manager, infrastructure, who was basically looking at having to do this design and looking at going, if we, to meet the consent requirements, it was going to be a lot of money to just because of what's in behind there. So, and there was a agreement in principle around it. We just need to close it out now.
Whose responsibility is it, that stormwater? Because that would be ours as a subdivider, presumably. So there's that legal piece to work out, because if they didn't do something to standard, you're doing something in combination with the developer that's actually our responsibility.
Correct. And so that was something that obviously through the 224C process, both our internal legal team and the consenting authority in issuing the covenant, and that was what they worked through. So our initial, to get down a little bit of detail around it, initially we just wanted a condition on the 224, on a condition of consent approval. The consenting team weren't comfortable with that. What they wanted is actual covenant on the title, which is, so that covenant sits there on the title permanently to ensure that whatever the ultimate solution is, whether we go and do it tomorrow and just put in what we were going to do, or the developer does it, or even if the developer in 50 years' time, sells the building and another building's put up, that covenant sits there on the title. So it's a very strong stick carrot, whatever, to ensure that that solution is always in place.
On them.
Yeah, and just to reiterate, our baseline in terms of going into this is, well, we can deliver that right now for $1 million.
Yeah.
And we could do that, but if we were both the developer of the subdivision and developer of the building, you wouldn't do that. So while the parties are coming to a practical and playing nicely together, then there's an opportunity to do that. And Dean's very aware of that.
All right. Be keen to see how it's managed.
Thank you, Paul.
Thank you.
Yep.
Okay, I'll move that the report is
Sorry.
noted.
Sorry.
Second.
Question if I may, Mr. Chair.
Oh, sorry, I didn't see your hand, Heath.
I just try to understand the financial table you've put here on page 83. The date at the top is March 2024. Is that, I'm just looking at the cost to complete. Have we still got 8 million to spend, or was that as at March and that's been spent?
We're pretty much, in terms of cost to date and committed funds, we're pretty much at zero. There is additional money for the carved out works around the Market Square and the $1 million for the stormwater works. And there is some work that's still in the budget for some ongoing maintenance and finishing off. I think it's around 400,000, which is for some of the work that the Alliance are doing in terms of finishing off. So as long as there's no more claims of any substantiation from anyone, we're at or about where we're on the money within QE of $500,000 each way.
No, that's cool. But is this dated now, or was this dated March?
January, February, March. I may not have changed that, so that probably should be of. I think we got that in July.
But it'll only change up to live today and forecast. It's not going to change the overall position. Yeah, it shouldn't be.
And then just remind me, so I mentioned 7 stages for the super lots. Is there 7 super lots?
There's actually 9.
9 super.
There were also with the developer. There's 8. So one of the stages was amalgamated together. I think it was lots 2 and 3. But yeah, 7 stages.
And then looking at table 4, the expected income, that 88 million, that's the sale of all of those super lots, excluding that last line. Excludes the.
And WellSmart.
It includes the WellSmart transactions as well.
And it includes the book. Okay. So when we're talking settlement on this first settlement, it's going to happen in the next potentially next year. That's only at one stage of the 7, so it's not the full 88, or is it?
Yeah. So yeah, the developer. There's an opportunity for them to settle on stage 1 and 2. Which isn't currently in our 10-year plan. We've just got settlement on stage 1. But within the next 12 months, we'll know whether the developer is going to go on both stages or just.
I guess just for my clarity, when we're talking about settlement, the conversation we've had today, that's only on stage 1, potentially stage 1 and 2, and not full 88.
Yeah.
That's correct. That's correct.
Yeah, and we've already had settlement on some of the other lots with WellSmart as well. There's just one. I think they've paid pretty much. Paid us half of lot 10, and there's still outstanding. Now that we've got title, we'll be able to indicate to WellSmart that they can now settle on lot 10.
And then sorry, Jan, so then just when we're talking about consenting, our consenting process was to get the titles issued, and we were talking about the stormwater and the contingency there potentially. When the developer goes through and finally gets their consent for the building they put up there, there'll be some stormwater constraints in there that they'll need to meet for whatever it is they're building as well, right?
Yeah, 100%.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, thank you, Heath. Paul, it's encouraging their pre-sales are going well.
Yeah, it's not my wheelhouse, but Dean, the developer in the workshop 2 days ago. I mean, it was a public workshop and I think he mentioned, I mean, it's a $300 million field stage and they're upward getting towards that 50% of that in terms of pre-sales. So that's good.
Yeah, great. So I've moved and Lyle has seconded. All those in favour?
Aye.
Carried. Thank you. Right. Thank you, Paul. Moving now to the annual planning report, we've got Charlotte, Stuart, and Catherine.
First, you've got Mike Hawken here from Deloitte.
And Mike. Hello, Mike.
Hi, sir.
Okay, the floor is yours.
I'm happy to introduce, there's a couple of items here related to audit. This relates to the annual report, which has a different timetable than it normally does because of the extended timeframe for the long-term plan. So that impacts the annual report, and we're looking at a final adoption of in December on the 13th, 12th or 13th. So yeah, just to bear that in mind. That's why you're looking at it now. So I'll hand over to Mike if he's got an attachment that includes their audit, the Deloitte audit plan. So if there are any questions on any of that, happy to take them.
Thanks, Stu. I'll just I'll take the report as read and just note that it's quite refreshing to be talking about the annual report rather than the LTP just for a few minutes. So there's obviously been a huge amount of work done in recent times. We've completed our planning work on the annual report. So we are well placed both in terms of completing the LTP, but also in terms of moving into the annual plan, annual report soon after. In terms of the content of our report, it is largely consistent with what we have presented previously. A couple of things just to note, in previous years, we have had the legal claim in relation to the Oaks settlement, which has been a major consideration, I guess, as part of the audit process. Obviously, with the settlement of Oak Shores in FY23, that becomes largely resolved as at FY24. So the really big ticket items, I guess, in the current year are really around the continued property valuations. You know, we are on an annual cycle for those valuations, so we'll work through those. They affect both roading, Three Waters, and investment property. So there's quite a significant body of work in getting through those. And the other area just to call out, I guess, is the continued focus around service performance reporting and not forgetting that. So, of course, when we do that annual report, we're signing off not only on the financial statements, but also that statement of service performance that has all of those performance measures that we report to the community. So, again, we'll work closely with management, working our way through them. Look, I think there's nothing more I need to call out. Perhaps the OAG audit brief is something perhaps I'll just comment on. So each year the OAG issues some particular areas of focus that they would like us to consider and look at. We anticipate looking at procurement a little bit more closely this year. And of course, we'll do the usual work we do around sensitive expenditure and things like that. But really with a little bit of an extra focus around procurement in the current year. And for some of that, we do, you know, somewhere in the region of 12 or 14 councils within Deloitte nationally. So we'll be doing some benchmarking in terms of what we're seeing elsewhere in terms of QLDC practice as well. So perhaps if I pause there, I'm happy to take any questions around the plan or the intended work for us to do.
Okay, questions?
Hey, it's good to you, Mr. Chair. Thanks, Mike.
Yes.
Just one question, just on that last point you made about the audit testing you were doing on procurement. Is that typically within scope of what you guys will be doing in the financial audit?
Yeah, we often will look at procurement, but really mostly around policy and really benchmarking. How up to date is the policy? Have you benchmarked that policy relative to OAG good practice? When was it last refreshed? But we won't necessarily go in and do a lot of transactional testing around procurement compliance with policy. This year we'll do a little bit more around that, just making sure that we've got some evidence around compliance with policy, etc. as well.
Okay, any further questions?
Yeah, I do, Stuart.
Yeah, Nikki?
Thanks very much, through the chair. You'll have to forgive me because I don't have a long history with audits and understanding scope, so questions might be outside of that. Thanks. You look at the group. When we go into something like an alliance, and there's a lot of financial, obviously accounting and things that go on in the background there. How do you treat that? Is there any, do you step into that in any way or not?
Yeah, well, it depends what you mean by alliance. So
Oh, sorry, the alliance as in the group that's been delivering on the streetscapes and the arterial project, and obviously we've had a significant overrun on that, up to, yeah, I think we were in 62 mil or something. We started out and we landed at 128, and obviously there's a lot of accounting in the background that our team, I'm interested in how you treat that.
Yeah, well, look, I guess, you know, we certainly do look at it to the extent that those numbers impact the financial statements of council and the group. So, you know, we will go back to look at contracts and to make sure that costs and funding are falling in the right place. And then we'll obviously work through a process of validating expenditure to the extent that it relates to the council financial statements as well.
Okay, that's great. So there is some work being done on that. The other question, this is only two, is around the balancing of the budget. So we had an overrun last year operationally, and I just noticed there seems to be quite a focus on CapEx in the long-term plan as well, but obviously the operational expenditure is driving our rates. So just with the information that's available to you, and I don't know what that is. I know what we've got available, which is our annual plans and long-term plans, and there's not a lot of detail on the operational expenditure lines. Presumably that sits in the background. Just interested to understand how you will, I guess, treat operational expenditure and that how you will delve into that and the issue around not balancing the budget last year.
Yeah, look, we certainly look at all numbers in the financial statements. So the fact that we've called out predominantly the balance sheet type items such as the valuations doesn't mean that we don't look at that operational expenditure. So we certainly will look at that, and we'll look at that relative to both prior year and budget. We'll do some particular testing around payroll, for example. And look, I guess, you know, when we then sit back and we do think about that budget perspective, you know, there is an objective that we should be balancing our budget on an annual basis. Now, clearly that doesn't happen all the time.
Yep.
If we were seeing a pattern of behaviour in terms of not meeting balanced budget, you know, that would be something that we would call out to the committee and council to consider.
Thank you, appreciate it.
Okay, any further questions? If not, I'll move for the noting of that paper, the contents. We've got a seconder, Nikki?
Yeah, happy.
Okay, all those in favour? Aye. Carried. Thank you. Moving next, I'll move that a resolution to exclude the public. We've got a seconder.
Oh, yes.
Thank you, Nikki. All those in favour? Aye, carried. We'll just wait for the public